What's going on YouTube? Chemi War here, coming at you with a brand new video. So as you can tell by the title, I'm going to be doing something different. Right now my channel's a bit experimental, so I'm going to be trying different stuff to see what works and what doesn't. With that being said, here's my first story time video ever. This is the story of when I got arrested for domestic aggravated assault against my Uncle Kenny. Now, allow me to preface this whole thing. Growing up, my family has always been involved in the produce industry. My great-grandfather started a little grocery store with a few select items and passed it down to his son, who eventually passed it down to my mother, who made deals with a company called Del Monte Produce that allowed her store to turn into an open-faced national produce supplier for various restaurants and other businesses. I had no real interest in the trade, so my mother retired and sold the business to my other uncle, Danny. My grandmother had 6 kids, by the way, just so you know. My mom had 2 brothers and 3 sisters, where she was the youngest, and one of those brothers wound up being the drunken, idiot lowlife that is my Uncle Kenny. Now, on a side note, Kenny has done some really dumb stuff in the past. One time he was working for my grandfather, and he decided to order a train car, a literal train car, full of lemons, so that they wouldn't have to buy any more for a while or something like that. Well, he was supposed to put them in a big cooler so that they'd stay fresh. Instead, he left them all to rot out in the sun in that train car. So my mother and my grandfather had to go out to that train car and shovel out all those gross lemons. Those gross, rotten, juiced out lemons that were, ugh. Can you imagine what that would be like? No, I couldn't. But anyway, after my mother retired, she realized it was a bit of a mistake, because now we had no financial backing, so my mother had to go find another job to keep us stable. I was between jobs at the time, so she saw an opportunity to employ both of us at once. It turns out this wasn't a great decision either. We had just moved out to Hickville, where, believe it or not, Kenny had his own little produce stand next to a big red barn house he lived in with very little flooring and no AC, along with a Siberian Husky he had to guard what little valuables he had. Although his stand was struggling because he had a bit of a reputation. Every cop in the county knew him by name because they've all arrested him or escorted him out of somewhere at least once before. And he was effectively banned from every liquor store in the area except for one little store across the street from where he lived/worked. And he was their #1 customer. My mother made a deal with him that we'd run the stand and pay him rent, but the one condition she asked for was that he leave the stand alone completely. Don't even come outside during business hours. He agreed, but never followed through. He'd come out while people were shopping and grab, squeeze, and or drop the merchandise to test its value. I'm not even sure what that means, but whatever. After a couple of weeks, he decided to rent out a dumpster for the property and said we could use it. We actually had a pathetic little shed in the backyard of our new residence my father wanted to tear down and rebuild. Kenny said we could use the dumpster to dispose of the debris, so we did. And this is where things started going downhill. After nearly falling and impaling myself several times on sharp wood and nails, we finally got it all in the dumpster. Just as me and my mother were about to head home for the night, Kenny comes out red-faced from both anger and alcohol. He gets right in my mother's face and starts calling her every name in the book. Mainly, his point was that we put the debris in the dumpster wrong, and they wouldn't take it. Now, with him as drunk as he was and his fist balled at his side, I decided to step in to defend my mother. I really did feel at the time he might hurt her in his drunken state, otherwise I would have stayed out of it. Let me also add that in the produce industry, you need to have some kind of blade, whether a little Swiss Army knife or a long kitchen knife or whatever. But if you try tearing open an onion bag with just your hands, you won't be very successful a lot of the time. So I had this knife on my hip. It was actually a really nice survival knife. It had a little compass at the bottom of the hilt. You could twist open the compass end, and it had a fishing line and such inside. It was a really nice tool to have, honestly. So I approached Kenny and told him to back off and go drink or something. And then he decides he wants to get in my face and start insulting me. In his anger, he raised his hands a few times, and I just secured my hand around the knife's hilt in case I had to defend myself. I think he saw this and decided to back off because he stormed off in the opposite direction. Now he was walking right past the register, so I had to walk about the same direction as him to get to the register and cut a slit in one of the onion bags in the cooler so it was ready to open the next morning. I pulled the knife halfway out of its sheath, and my mother saw this and flipped. "What the fuck are you doing? Put that away!" she screamed. Kenny turned and saw me drawing the knife, and his eyes went wide. Being a very paranoid drunk, he just shouted, "You think you're gonna stab me, boy? You need to learn some respect. You're going to jail tonight." But of course, much more slurred. My mom pulled me aside, told me violence wasn't the answer. I told her I was just going to cut open an onion bag. Kenny hides in his barn thing behind his dog and calls the police. So, since he was already halfway through his call, we figured we'd just go home and see what happens. We got home kind of late, and it was about 10 o'clock when dinner was ready. Before I could make a plate, 2 cops knocked on my door. Me and my mom answered. They pulled us outside and began asking questions. They informed us of the report made. I told them I had no intent of hurting him. I just put my hand on the hilt mid-fight to scare him away so the conflict would end. My mom, with me not nearby to give any input because the police wanted me to wait inside, said I was about 3 feet away from Kenny when the knife was drawn. Unfortunately, she has a terrible judgment of distance. 3 feet is roughly the length of your arm. I was not arm's length from Kenny. I'm 6'1", and there could have been 2 or 3 of me laying long ways between us at the time. The cops pulled me back out, put me in handcuffs, and said they had to call their sergeant to see if I was going to jail that night. Turns out, I was. They put me in the back of the cop car, took me to jail, and I spent maybe 24 hours in there before my mother could get me out on bond, luckily. What actually happened in jail? Now that might just be a story for another video. I was charged with domestic aggravated assault, went on the pretrial intervention program because we couldn't afford a trial, and I got a first-hand perspective on the American legal justice system in action. Take my word on this, it's absolutely broken. Anyway guys, that's my story time video. This topic is a little iffy to discuss, I know, but I just wanted to get my story out there. If you believe I really committed a crime here and deserve to go to jail, so be it. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this. If you want to see more of the story videos, leave me a like, hit that subscribe button, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when a new video releases. That's all for today. Have a great one. Chemi War, out.